Chairman, and thank you, Inspector, for being here this afternoon and all day here. You identified a lot of devices that were part of the investigation in your report, the different servers and personal devices. In your investigation, did you review whether those conducting the mid-year investigation searched for emails with the ClintonEmail.com root on databases that held data collected pursuant to FISA?
I'm not sure as I sit here, but I can certainly get back to you promptly on that.
Yeah, I'd like to know that. Page 186 of the report, when discussing the topic of whether the FBI would have a separate announcement from the DOJ about the declination to prosecute, Director Comey said the FBI was in the middle of a 500-year flood. And the quote here is, quote, "I mean, to my mind, it was a crazy idea, but we were in a 500-year flood. As you all know, as you all have now investigated enough and lived enough to know that this is a circumstance that has never happened before. We're criminally investigating one of the candidates for president of the United States. President Obama's comments obviously weighed on me as well. You've got the president who has already said there's no there. And so all of that creates a situation where how do you get out of this without grievous damage to the institution?" Reading this sounds as though Director Comey, his decision in this context of having a separate statement was imbued with political considerations, does it not?
He was certainly speaking about the political perceptions that resulted from President Obama's comments and other actions he was concerned with.
Well, he was considering matters just beyond facts.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
And he was considering how, in his own subjective view, that the FBI was going to be viewed in response to this investigation.
Agreed.
And the same would hold true not just for his July 5 press conference, but his October 28th letter.
Agree.
You wonder how the FBI gets to a point where there's a 500-year flood. You know, I represent Johnstown, Pennsylvania, and they had a horrific flood back in 1889. And there was a big rainstorm before that flood, but there were things going on years before. And if you read David McCullough's book about the flood, you understand that things were going on before. And to understand this in context, we're here today because you had the third highest official in the executive branch decide to conduct official business on a private server for whatever reason. And I read through this report and just see political consideration after political consideration. Isn't Mr. Comey's decision to usurp the authority of the Attorney General in order to protect the Bureau inherently a political decision?
I think you can certainly view it that way.
On page 10, the report states that Mr. Comey's decision-making process made an implicit assumption that President Clinton would be president. Isn't that yet another example of politics playing a role here?
It's certainly his reading the political tea leaves in his view.
When Mr. Comey described Attorney General Lynch's presence imbued corrosive doubt into the entire process, doesn't this confirm the need for a special counsel in this investigation from the very beginning?
I think if Director Comey's view was, as he laid out, the answer wasn't, I'm going to take over and announce the decision. The answer was, I'm going to go to the Attorney General, explain my concerns, and ask her to either recuse or get a special counsel.
You know, going back over the years and I talk about how the 500-year flood, things happening for years, and you look at everything that was circulating in the Clinton administration and all the scandals that we saw then and the continuing scandals. I remember the 96 campaign and the fundraising scandal there, and Charlie Tree and Johnny Chung and Johnny Wan and Maria Siai, and Louis Freeh was looking at that, the director of the FBI, and he said, "It is difficult to imagine at that time a more compelling situation for an independent counsel." But Janet Reno never appointed one. Why wasn't a special counsel ever appointed in this Clinton email investigation, looking at Attorney General Lynch? Why is it that they never?
We have explanations here as to why it was. Attorney General Lynch said she didn't think the standard was met and that there should be one applied. Director Comey essentially told us that he was using it as a leverage point to get the investigation moving as opposed to it actually being presented for serious consideration.
But we see instance after instance where Director Comey was making political calculations.
Gentleman's out of time.
I think start. I'll go back to what we've talked about in here and what I talked about earlier. And as you referenced, it's easy to say there's a 500-year flood, but the reality is we're faced all the time with what people perceive to be unique circumstances. That doesn't mean you make various judgments along the way. In fact, I think many people would argue that's when it's most important to stay true to what the institution values are, norms are, procedures are. And you're right, the right approach here, if there was a concern that the Attorney General could not fairly or by appearance decide this, the right response would have been for Director Comey to present that to the Attorney General and for her to make a decision. But she ultimately was the one who was politically accountable in our system of government for that final decision, not him.
Gentleman yields back.